Have you ever felt like the darkness in your room was watching you? That the shadows weren't just shapes, but something alive? Tonight, we dive into a story that proves sometimes the shadows don't just stay at the edge, they cross it. There are places in this world where the dark doesn't feel empty. It feels alive. When Daniel first moved into his new apartment, he thought the silence was a blessing. After losing his younger brother in a car crash, he just wanted to be alone. No roommates, no noise, no reminders of the world outside. Just him and his thoughts. But on his very first night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he noticed something strange. The shadows in the far corner of his room weren't still. At first, he brushed it off. Maybe it was just his eyes adjusting or headlights from the street outside. But as the hours stretched on, the shadows seemed to shift, twitch, bend in ways they shouldn't, and then he heard it. A whisper, not from outside, not from the walls, but from the darkness itself. It said his name, Daniel. He shot upright, heart pounding, switching on the lamp by his bed. The moment the light filled the room, the shadows snapped back into place, dead still, silent. Daniel laughed nervously, shaking his head. Just stress, he muttered. It's just stress. But deep down, a cold thought began to crawl inside him. What if the shadows weren't empty at all? That was only the first night. The next would prove to Daniel that the shadows had been waiting for him all along. The second night was worse. Daniel had left every light in the apartment on, even the bathroom. He told himself it was ridiculous. He was a grown man, not a child afraid of the dark. But when he finally drifted to sleep, exhaustion pulling him under, he woke to find the lights had gone out. Every bulb. The clock on his nightstand blinked midnight, though the power in the building hadn't failed. It was just his apartment, and in the corner the shadows had grown darker, thicker. Daniel rubbed his eyes, trying to focus. The shape wasn't just a blur anymore. It was long, stretched, almost like a person standing perfectly still, its head bowed as if watching him. He froze. Who's there? His voice cracked in the silence. No answer, but then came the sound again, that whisper, low, trembling, right against his ear, though no one stood near him. Daniel. He leapt from the bed, slamming the switch on the wall. The lights flickered back to life instantly, and just like that, the corner was empty. No figure, no shadow, nothing. His heart hammered so hard he thought it might burst. He checked every lock, every window, every room. Alone. Completely alone. And yet, when he returned to his bedroom, he found something waiting. On the floor, in the same corner where the shadow had stood, were footprints, bare wet, as if someone had just stepped out of water. But Daniel lived on the third floor. That night, Daniel didn't sleep, because the moment he closed his eyes, he knew the shadows would be waiting. Daniel stopped pretending it was stress. Something was inside his apartment. Something that didn't belong to this world. He tried staying away from home, spent long hours at coffee shops, even slept in his car once. But no matter where he went, the same thing followed him. The shadows. At first, he only saw them in his apartment corner. But soon, he noticed them in other places too, shifting unnaturally under street lamps, stretching too long across diner floors, curling toward him on sidewalks at night. The worst was the grocery store. He stood in the frozen aisle, grabbing a carton of milk, when he saw his reflection in the freezer glass. Except it wasn't his reflection. The figure in the glass was him, yes, same clothes, same face. But behind his reflection, a shadow leaned close, its hand resting on his shoulder like it was already claiming him. Daniel stumbled back, heart slamming against his ribs. When he looked again, his reflection was normal, just him, alone. But as he turned, he swore he saw something slip between the aisles, a patch of darkness moving like it had weight, like it had intent. He dropped the milk, rushing out of the store. That night, he didn't even make it to bed, because when he opened his apartment door, every light was already on, glowing bright. But the corner was darker than ever. And this time, the shadow didn't stay still. It began to crawl toward him, slow, patient, as though it knew he had nowhere left to run. For the first time, Daniel realized the shadows weren't haunting his apartment. They were haunting him. Daniel couldn't take it anymore. He went 3 nights without sleep, guzzling coffee until his hands shook, pacing his apartment with every light blazing. But shadows don't need darkness. He learned that the hard way. On the 4th night, just as dawn broke, Daniel slumped against the wall, half awake, eyes burning. And that's when he saw it, clearer than ever. The shadow was no longer just a shape, it was a man. Tall, faceless, his body dripping with that same wet darkness, as though he had crawled out of some black ocean beneath the floorboards. And the worst part, Daniel recognized him, not his face. The figure had none, but the way it stood, the tilt of the head, the weight in its shoulders, it was his brother, the one who had died in the crash. Daniel staggered back, shaking his head. No, you're gone. But the shadow didn't move, didn't vanish with the lights. It only lifted one arm, slowly pointing at Daniel's bed. Heart hammering, Daniel turned, and there, carved deep into the wood of his headboard, were words that hadn't been there before. His throat went dry, because suddenly it wasn't just grief. It wasn't just guilt. The shadows weren't haunting him. They were inviting him. Daniel realized then, the shadow's edge wasn't some outside force. It was a doorway, and it wanted him to step through. Daniel didn't tell anyone. Who would believe him? That his dead brother was waiting for him in the dark. For 2 more nights, he ignored the words carved into his bed frame. But the shadow grew bolder. It no longer lingered in the corner. It stood at the edge of his room, closer every time he blinked, as if each second he resisted only pulled it nearer. By the 3rd night, Daniel broke. He sat on the floor, every light on, clutching a bottle in his hand. His voice cracked, desperate. What do you want from me? The air turned colder, pressing against his lungs. And then, from the blackness at the far end of the room, the whisper came again. His brother's voice this time, not just a faceless echo. Daniel, it's better here. The shadow stepped forward. Each footfall left a dark, wet mark on the floorboards. Daniel's chest heaved as it stopped just a breath away. Its arm lifted, a hand of pure darkness stretched toward him, and for the first time, Daniel didn't back away. He reached out. The moment his fingers brushed the shadow's hand, the world collapsed. The lights in his apartment shattered, plunging him into pure black. The ground trembled beneath him, and in that instant, Daniel felt it. The shadow's edge. It was like standing between 2 worlds, his apartment flickering faintly around him, and beyond it something vast. A landscape made of endless night, where shapes moved and whispered, where shadows had form and hunger, and there just a few steps away he saw him, his brother, not a ghost, not a memory, but standing whole, waiting with a faint smile. Come back with me, his brother whispered again. You don't belong there anymore. Daniel realized this was never about haunting. It was about choosing, step fully into the darkness or fight to return to the light. Daniel stood frozen at the threshold. 1 step, and he would be with his brother again. 1 step, and the pain, the loneliness, the guilt, they'd all vanish into the dark. His brother's hand stretched toward him, steady, patient. But behind that smile, something was wrong. The longer Daniel stared, the more he noticed it. His brother's skin wasn't whole. It shimmered like liquid shadow. His eyes weren't the bright green he remembered. They were black, endless, swallowing light. And the voices, God, the voices. From the vastness beyond, whispers rose, thousands of them, calling his name, hissing, begging him to cross over. Daniel's heart thundered. This wasn't just his brother. It was everything waiting on the other side. He took a step back. Instantly, the shadows screamed. The ground beneath him split, black tendrils lashing around his ankles, dragging, pulling. His brother's smile twisted into something sharp, hungry. You can't go back, Daniel, the shadow hissed. You're already mine. Daniel fought, clawing at the floor, gasping for air as the darkness tried to swallow him whole. The apartment flickered in and out of sight, like a dying light bulb. 1 second he was home, the next drowning in that endless night. And then, instinct. He reached toward the lamp beside his bed, the one thing still glowing faintly in the blur between worlds. His hand slammed the switch. Light exploded. A scream tore through the apartment. Not his, but the shadows. The tendrils recoiled, the darkness shriveling back. His brother's figure dissolved, dripping into black smoke that burned away under the glow. And then, silence. Daniel collapsed onto the floor, gasping, the apartment bright again, empty. Just him. But carved into the floorboards where the shadow had stood, one last message remained. The edge never leaves. The Daniel survived the night, but he knew the truth. The shadows weren't gone. They were waiting, patient, just at the edge of the light. For weeks after that night, Daniel tried to live normally. He went back to work. He forced himself into routines. He told himself the shadows were gone, but it's hard to pretend when every room you enter feels just a little too dark. When every night, just before sleep, you hear faint whispers, like a voice you once loved, calling from the corners of the room. Daniel stopped telling people. What could he say? That the shadows still followed him, that sometimes in mirrors and windows, he caught glimpses of a world he swore he left behind. No, he stayed quiet, until one night, months later, his neighbor knocked on his door, a pale woman with shaking hands. She asked if he'd been seeing things, strange things. Daniel froze. The woman's eyes welled with tears. She whispered, almost too softly to hear, "They called my name last night." Daniel's stomach dropped, because he knew the shadow's edge hadn't been after just him. It was spreading, and if you've ever felt like the shadows in your room were moving on their own, maybe they've already found you too.